Important meeting taking place today in the White House. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to become the first foreign leader to meet President Trump at the White House in his second term. Today, the meeting is due to take place at a fairly critical moment for the Gaza ceasefire, the release of the hostages, Palestinian prisoners, and the decisions about what comes next. And remember, this is only phase one of that ceasefire, and I think it's fair to say that the subsequent phases are far from baked in. Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts, joins me, former senior British diplomat and former chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee. I mean, good afternoon to you. I mean, this meeting couldn't really be more momentous, could it?
Hello, Sheila. And I think it's absolutely right. We should spend some time on what's happening in the Middle East, as well as all the other excitements. As you say, we are 2 weeks into this first phase, 6-week period of the ceasefire. And that's a subject where, in principle, Donald Trump and Netanyahu ought to be aligned. Trump has been a long-standing supporter of Israel, of course. Netanyahu, that's a symbolic first foreign visitor to Washington. However, I think they aren't fully aligned because Trump clearly wants this ceasefire to hold. He wants to get the hostages out. He wants to be the person who can say he brought peace to Gaza. Netanyahu, I'm not so sure. Certainly he wants the hostages, but the second phase of the ceasefire would require him to commit to a full ceasefire and a pull-out of Israeli forces. And that is very divisive in his own cabinet, with some voices strongly against it. So there are areas where these two are not necessarily in the same place.
There is bound to be discussion, isn't there, on and again we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves because those phases aren't complete and certainly aren't certain, but there's bound to be serious talk about who secures Gaza beyond this, because it can't be the Israelis. The Israelis will need to secure Israel, won't they? Now, they will argue that one of the ways they secure Israel is by securing Gaza. That's surely going to be a bit of a tough point on which to the two will discuss, and their ministers as well around them.
It's absolutely essential point, yes. I mean, if Israel continues to control Gaza, well, that's continued occupation. That ensures continued rounds of attacks, of violence, of hostility to Israel. On the other hand, Hamas, Israel will find it very hard for them to have any role. You remember that Netanyahu's first objective in launching this attack on Gaza was to eliminate Hamas as well as release the hostages. There's the Palestinian Authority, who in principle could, but that's a very weak organization, corrupt, not very well respected. Or you fall back on some sort of international peacekeeping force, probably provided by the moderate Arab states like Egypt and the Gulf. But as far as I know, there's no agreement to that. And they won't take that on unless Israel's prepared to commit to some kind of future view of a Palestinian state in due course. So who is going to keep law and order in Gaza while the vital humanitarian operation goes on? That's hugely important and absolutely not clear.
I was listening to a podcast about all of this yesterday called Call Me Back. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It's a very good podcast that touches on the Middle East more often than not. And one of the points they were making was that Joe Biden, different people altogether, Joe Biden had red lines about who he would meet in Israel. So, for example, Smotrich, he would not meet. But that Trump is more likely to be, to go in, metaphorically speaking, guns blazing and say, I'll meet anyone and here's how it's going to be. You get the feeling that tone might actually shift things.
It could do. I mean, he was clearly influential in getting the first phase over the line in the first place. And yes, he's perfectly capable, as Trump, of surprising everyone with some sort of theatrical gesture. But bear in mind as well, there's something else he wants here. He wants also to be the broker of a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He was working on that in his first term. So was Joe Biden. They got these Abraham Accords, which bring peace with the UAE and Bahrain. But the big prize is Saudi Arabia. That's kind of Nobel Peace Prize territory for Trump. And for that, he needs the Israelis to be prepared to accept that they will not continue to run Gaza. They will pull out, and that there will be some kind of international administration or future Palestinian administration. So there are contradictory pressures here. The likes of Smotrich really want to see Israel continue in occupation, getting rid of the Gazans if possible, and then setting up settlements there. If Netanyahu goes down that route, there's no possibility of an agreement with Trump. So he's walking a bit of a tightrope.
And on that whole question of the, you touched there on the West Bank as well as Gaza. I mean, the focus is Gaza, but the Abraham Accords were also looking at the West Bank, weren't they, as well? What the quid pro quo might be on some of those settlement areas.
Yes, I mean, in the Abraham Accords a few years ago, the issue of Palestinian state was not top of the agenda. And it doesn't say very much about them. Now, you couldn't have an agreement with Saudi Arabia without saying something about a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza. Because of the war in Gaza, that's become, I think, something any Arab state would have to demand. So, yes, the future of the West Bank, the future of Israeli settlements on the West Bank, as well as Gaza, will be vital, both in terms of trying to get out of this cycle of violence and retaliation that Israel is in, but also of a broader peace in the region, which would be very interesting, particularly because Iran is in a weak place and the Saudis are also reaching out to Iran. So a fundamental reshaping of the Middle East really has to pass by some kind of prospect of a Palestinian state in due course.
Does the weakening of Iran that we've seen, and again, that could go further, we don't know, but does the weakening of Iran also inevitably weaken Hamas, the remnants of Hamas, who in these hostage handovers are, they're obviously trying to put a show on and, recording these videos and all the rest of that will be for propaganda purposes, I'm sure, within their own circles as much as the international audience. But how weakened do you think Hamas are? And are they sufficiently weakened for some kind of agreement to actually require the remaining Hamas leadership, whatever that is, to leave?
Well, first of all, they are definitely weakened, not only by Iran, but also by the smashing of Hezbollah, who are closer to them and a source of weapons and supplies. I mean, all these allies that they had are now much weakened by the Israeli attacks, and therefore they won't be getting resupply of arms and weapons. The Israelis have shut that off from the Egyptian border as well. So I think probably they have what they had on the 7th of October, haven't received much more. They must be in a very weakened state. I find it hard to imagine that they're going to get on a boat and sail away to Tunis, which is what the PLO did from Beirut in 1982, but somehow accepting that they are going to have to take a lower profile and drop the armed conflict with Israel if they want Gaza ever to recover. I mean,
it's
that's
not looking that way, though, is it? It's really not looking that way.
Even as I say it, I find it very hard to believe that's going to be possible. So that's a real dilemma, because if Hamas hang on, if there are still enough of them, if they've got enough weapons to put on the show you talk about, then the temptation in Israel will be to stay on the ground, continue to hit them where necessary, and we just have a continuation of the conflict, ceasefire breaks down. I mean, that is certainly a clear possibility, unless somebody can come up with some solution which takes Hamas out of the front line of law and order and security in Gaza.
And in the north of Gaza in particular, you've got that massive rebuilding job. I mean, where does that even begin?
Well, it can only start really with some kind of restoring of stability, law and order on the streets.
Governance,
and the money is going to have to come from the Gulf, because I think the European money is going to have to go into a reconstruction of Ukraine. The Americans won't be in for putting money in. So it's going to have to be the wealthy Gulf countries who fund that, but they can only do that if there's some degree, not of peace perhaps, but of stability, to allow all the facilities to be rebuilt, water, electricity, to get food working and rebuild the homes.
Is it fair to
decade-long task.
Is it fair to say that amid the horrors of this war, it has revealed that a great deal of previous money pumped into Gaza, i.e. given to Hamas, essentially, I know it went through other sort of funding streams, but that's where it was ending up, was used to build a military infrastructure underground largely, as well as weaponry. You can't imagine that the Arab states being relaxed about that if they're funding it, can you?
No, you can't. Absolutely, they won't do that. That's why there has to be some sort of deal which involves Hamas stepping back from the grip that they've had on Gaza. I mean, I think some of the money that went to Hamas did indeed go into hospitals and schools and facilities, because Hamas was a kind of social welfare organization as well as a terrorist group, a bit like Hezbollah in Lebanon. But no, I don't think that can continue if the Arabs are going to invest hundreds of billions of euros, dollars in rebuilding Gaza. They're going to want a representative Palestinian authority of some kind.
And a guarantee, a security guarantee of some sort, yeah.
All of that. So all this is extremely spiky and difficult.